You're joking, aren't you? It's the Teesside Chef. I'm preparing a satisfying cottage pie tart today because I'm making this video in January, which is the most depressing time of the year, so they say. And it's definitely got me down in the dumps. I mean, what's the point there? But at least this comfort food will make me feel better for a brief period, and I'll get through the pastry base as quickly as possible, so you don't click off and leave, because if you do that, that will just make me feel even worse about things, and I will explain the full recipe here, but I don't know why. You probably won't even make this anyway, will you? I can very genuinely feel your indifference towards me, and I have to say, it's hurtful, but not surprising. So I went in with 200 grams of plain flour, half a teaspoon of salt, a quarter of a teaspoon each of pepper and baking soda, a teaspoon of dried oregano, and 100 grams of room temperature butter, and I blitzed it all up with a couple of tablespoons of milk to get this pastry that I'm going to roll out here. And I've done this pastry tart base lots of times in my videos, so all of my regular visitors are probably going to get bored of me now and leave me forever, and I just don't think I could bear that. And if you've never seen one of my videos before, you probably hate me already for not explaining my pastry folding and unfolding technique to get this in the pan here, and for not showing you how I tidy the pastry up with my hands and take off the excess with the rolling pin and then prick the pastry with a fork about 3/4 of the way through. And of course, when you've done all of those steps, you have to put this pastry in the freezer for at least 20 minutes, and when I did that, the icy blast I received from my chest freezer when I opened the door made me feel even more cold and vulnerable. But I still managed to summon the wherewithal to bake this tart at 160 degrees Celsius, 320 Fahrenheit fan setting at the bottom of the oven for 25 minutes, and once I'd done that, I took out my baking beans and put it back in the oven for 15 minutes to dry out properly. And I'll have a full-on breakdown if I get a soggy bottom, so I brushed the now cooled tart base with beaten egg white to seal before setting it in my oven again for 7 to 8 minutes, and that was that. And I just wanted to go back to bed after doing all that, but I've managed to persevere through the dark psychological clouds that are swirling around my head, and I'm determined to finish now. And as I went shopping for all these ingredients, stoically fighting my way through the dank wet cold, jostled by the wind and my fellow shoppers, it occurred to me that nobody cared who I was, and nobody around me even had the slightest interest in my well-being. I pondered that if I were to drop dead in the street, nobody would even notice, save for a few people who would have to step over my now lifeless corpse. But I still went ahead and bought a medium onion, a medium carrot, a few mushrooms, and 500 grams of mincemeat. I cooked the veggies down a bit with a pinch of salt, and now the mince is in there, I'm going to add another half a teaspoon of salt, a good pinch of pepper, and a teaspoon each of dried parsley, dried thyme, and dried oregano. And I'm grateful in a way that my innate human instinct to continue existing has implored me to press on with this recipe, because I'm really building up the flavours now with a teaspoon of mustard and a tablespoon of Worcester sauce, and you can use soy sauce here if you don't have Worcester sauce. And even though I'm in a prison of my own self-loathing, I still remember to add 2 cloves of garlic to my cottage pie stroke tart stew filling, and the time I spent cooking this all through until the meat was fully cooked seemed to fly by because I was lost in another world, thinking back to my younger, happier days before I entered the adult world to absolutely no fanfare at all. But hey, surely the 500 millilitres of gravy I have here will make me feel better. If gravy can't make you feel better, then all is lost, surely. You can use any beef stock or a stock cube in 500 millilitres of water here instead of the gravy I have, as long as you make sure to thicken the stew properly at the end. And that's what I'm doing with the cornstarch and water slurry here. And the amount of cornstarch you need will depend on the thickness of the stock or gravy you used. I went with 3 teaspoons of cornstarch here, but you will need more if you have a thin, watery stock. But wherever you do use, you'll need to bring your stew to the correct texture, where it should almost be holding its shape when you run through it with a spoon. And I'm going to bring it to the correct texture by cooking it down now for a while. And this is perhaps the most important part of making this recipe if you're doing a tart base, because we don't want it to be pissing everywhere when we cut into it. And this is the correct texture where it's just slowly oozing back when you run your spoon through it, and I wish some meaning was slowly oozing back into my quiddity. But anyway, a taste test will tell you if you need to adjust your seasoning, and we can allow the stew to fully cool now and make our potatoes. And in my 24 centimetre pan, Around 800 grams of peeled potatoes is the right amount, and they need cooking, of course, and I'm sure you lot know how to cook potatoes. I mean, you don't even need me. Nobody does. Not really. And I'm putting this sumptuous cooled filling in my fully cooled shell, and if I could feel joy right now, I would be delighted with this so far, but it's hard to be positive when you feel like you're slowly disappearing. It's a cruel gift indeed that nature has bestowed upon us that we might contemplate our own insignificance. And if that's too cynical for you, what about this? Perhaps nature only created an intelligent life form such as ourselves in the first place, so that we might ponder nature itself. Torture a life form with the knowledge of its own irrelevance and impending death, just so there is a consciousness to marvel at the wonders nature has conjured. Humans, a testament to and a confirmation of nature's vanity. But anyway, as you can see, life goes on, and I've mashed these potatoes with my potato ricer before adding 2 large knobs of butter, and I'm stirring this all together to melt the butter, but I'm not whipping it too much because I don't want it to become all starchy. And nobody listens to what I have to say anymore, but if you were listening earlier, I used an egg white to seal my tart base, and this here yolk is what was left over. So I've added it to 50 millilitres of cream, and I'm going to add this to my potato as well. And I'm going to pipe this potato onto the top of my cottage tart to make it look as pretty as possible, even though it's meaningless. Like an old showgirl at a dresser mirror, manically applying makeup and sobbing as she realises she'll never rediscover past glories. I feel you. I feel your pain. I feel your loss. And anyway, a final sprinkle of parmesan on top will give a light crunch as I attempt to turn the tide of despondency. Hey, and I know, perhaps a sprinkling of dried herbs to hide my melancholic gloom. But there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel with my secret cottage pie tart crispy topping, and this could not be easier really, because I'm just chopping up some potatoes into very small cubes, and I'm going to deep fry them until they're all crunchy. And after not very long, they'll be all golden and are going to be absolutely perfect when scattered on top of this potential port in my psychological storm. And here it comes now, and there it is out of the oven and sizzling. But I have to delay what little pleasure I am able to feel for at least 30 minutes before cutting into this, ideally. But while I'm waiting, I can sprinkle my crunchy potato topping all over, and let's have a good close-up. And I have to say, I'm optimistic that this glorious cottage pie tart will be able to offer perhaps a small oasis in a desert of empty longing and general hopelessness. But in any event, please think of me when you make this. And please come along again and check up on me, won't you? Tara.